In 1946, Hungary printed a banknote worth 100 million trillion pengő. You read that right, 100 million trillion. And it still wasn't enough to buy a loaf of bread. That's not ancient history or some far-off third world anomaly. That's what happens at the end stage of a pattern we're seeing unfold right now in slow motion across the world's major currencies. The same pattern, the same warning signs, and most people are watching their purchasing power evaporate without understanding why. Today, we're going to decode exactly how inflation destroys your money. Not the sanitized textbook version, but the real mechanism that's been working against you for decades. If you want to understand why everything feels more expensive and what that means for your financial future, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Here's what nobody tells you about inflation. It's not just prices going up, that's the symptom. The disease is something far more insidious. It's the systematic transfer of wealth from people who hold cash to people who hold assets and debt. And the mechanism? It's actually beautifully simple once you see it. Imagine you have a pizza that represents all the goods and services in an economy. Now imagine that pizza is cut into 8 slices, and each slice represents the value held by dollars in circulation. If you own $1, you own 1/8 of that pizza's value. Now, what happens when the central bank creates 4 more dollars out of thin air? Suddenly, that same pizza is cut into 12 slices. You still hold $1, 1 slice, but your slice is now smaller. The pizza didn't grow, your claim to it just got diluted. That's inflation in its purest form. But here's where it gets really interesting. That dilution doesn't happen evenly or all at once, and that's the part that destroys the middle class. Let me take you back to Weimar Germany in 1923. A woman named Anna Eisenmenger kept a diary during the hyperinflation. She wrote about how her life savings, carefully accumulated over 30 years, became worthless in 18 months. Not reduced, worthless. She described watching workers get paid twice a day because money was losing value by the hour. They'd run to shops during lunch breaks to buy anything, food, clothes, furniture, before their morning wages became worthless by evening. Quick note, this video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Always do your own research and consult with qualified professionals before making financial decisions. Now, you might be thinking, that's extreme, that's hyperinflation. We have 3% inflation, not 300%, and you'd be right. But here's what most people miss. The mechanism is identical. It's just running in slow motion. In slow motion, wealth destruction is actually more dangerous because people don't notice it happening. Let me show you exactly what I mean with some numbers that should make you uncomfortable. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics' own data, the US dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. Read that again? 97%. A dollar today buys what 3 cents bought in 1913. But it's not a straight line. It's a stair-step pattern of accelerations. From 1913 to 1933, relatively stable. From 1933 to 1971, steady erosion. Post-1971, when Nixon severed the dollar's last link to gold, acceleration. The dollar lost more purchasing power from 1971 to 2024 than it did in the entire previous period. And from 2020 to 2024, we've seen one of the steepest drops in modern history. The M2 money supply, basically the amount of dollars sloshing around in the economy, increased by 40% in just 2 years during the pandemic. 40%. That's the pizza slicing I mentioned, happening at warp speed. Here's the crazy part. The official inflation rate during that period was reported as 7 to 9% annually. But the money supply grew by 40%. Where did the other 30% go? This is where understanding inflation gets really important for your wallet. When new money enters the economy, it doesn't spread evenly like water filling a bathtub. It cascades through like a waterfall, hitting different levels at different times. This is called the Cantillon Effect, named after an 18th century economist who first described it. The people closest to the money spigot, big banks, government contractors, large corporations, asset holders, get the new money first while prices are still low. They can buy houses, stocks, and real assets before prices adjust. Then the money flows down. By the time it reaches wages and regular people, prices have already risen. Your salary might go up 3%, but the house you wanted to buy went up 20%. That gap? That's wealth being extracted from your future. Let me give you a personal example that makes this visceral. Now, this is where it gets even more important to understand. There are 3 types of inflation, and they destroy wealth through different mechanisms. First, there's monetary inflation, the pizza slicing I described. When the money supply grows faster than the economy, each unit of currency represents a smaller claim on real goods. According to the Federal Reserve's own data, M2 money supply has grown at an average rate of 7% annually since 1960, while real GDP growth averaged just 3%. That 4% gap, that's the invisible tax on every dollar you hold. Second, there's asset price inflation. This is where things get sneaky. While the official CPI says inflation is 3%, housing prices might rise 10%, stocks 15%, and certain commodities 20%. The government says inflation is moderate because they weight these differently in their calculation. But if you're trying to buy a house or invest for retirement, you're experiencing much higher real inflation. A study by the Chapwood Index, which tracks the actual cost of the top 500 items people spend money on in major cities, consistently shows real inflation running at 8 to 12% annually, more than double official figures. Third, there's hidden inflation through quality reduction. This one is insidious. Your yogurt container shrinks from 8 ounces to 5.3 ounces, but the price stays the same. That's 34% inflation, hidden in package redesign. Your favorite chocolate bar gets lighter. Your streaming service has more ads. Same price, less value. This is called shrinkflation, and it's how companies pass inflation to consumers without technically raising prices. But wait, there's something even more important that connects all of this. Every major currency collapse in history followed a predictable pattern. And we're seeing multiple stages of that pattern right now. Stage 1, a crisis forces massive government spending. For Weimar Germany, it was World War I reparations. For Zimbabwe, it was land reforms and economic mismanagement. For Venezuela, it was collapsing oil revenues. For us, Stage 2, the government can't raise taxes enough or cut spending sufficiently, so it borrows. When borrowing becomes difficult or expensive, the central bank steps in to monetize the debt. Fancy language for printing money to buy government bonds. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from $900 billion in 2008 to $9 trillion at its peak in 2022. That's a tenfold increase. That's not normal monetary policy. That's emergency life support that became permanent. Stage 3. Inflation starts showing up, first in assets, then in consumer goods. We're here now. Housing up dramatically. Stocks at record highs despite shaky fundamentals. Food prices rising faster than wages. The IMF's October 2024 data shows global food prices up 40% since 2019 in many developing nations and 25% in developed ones. That's not transitory. That's the new baseline resetting. Stage 4 is where things accelerate, the currency crisis. People lose faith in the currency's ability to hold value, so they rush to exchange it for anything real. Gold, silver, foreign currency, property, even toilet paper. Remember the photos from Venezuela in 2018? People using stacks of believer notes as napkins because it was cheaper than buying napkins. That's not stupidity. That's rational behavior when money dies. You might be thinking, we're not Venezuela. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. This can't happen here. And that's exactly what every citizen of every failed currency thought before it happened. The British pound was the world's reserve currency for 200 years, until it wasn't. These transitions don't happen overnight. They happen slowly, then suddenly. Here's what you need to watch for. These are the patterns that matter. First, watch the velocity of money, how fast money changes hands. When people expect inflation, they spend faster, which creates more inflation. It's a feedback loop. The Fed's own data shows money velocity collapsed during COVID and is now starting to climb again. That's the spark that can turn low inflation into high inflation. Second, watch real interest rates, the interest rate minus inflation. When real rates go negative, it means you're being punished for saving. You literally lose purchasing power by keeping money in a bank. We had negative real rates for most of 2021, 2023. That's a massive red flag historically. Third, watch the government's ability to finance its debt. The U.S. now spends more on interest payments than on defense. According to the Congressional Budget Office's 2024 projections, debt service will become the single largest budget item within a decade. When a government spends more on interest than critical services, there are only 3 options: cut spending drastically, raise taxes dramatically, or inflate the debt away. Guess which one politicians always choose. Fourth, watch what central banks do versus what they say. The Fed said inflation was transitory. It wasn't. They said they'd keep rates high until inflation was controlled. Then they started cutting rates while inflation was still above target. When the words and actions diverge, watch the actions. Here's the framework for thinking about this that actually empowers you. Inflation is not a natural phenomenon like weather, it's a policy choice. Every inflation, every single one, stems from governments spending more than they collect and central banks enabling it by printing money. Understanding this gives you power because you can prepare for the consequences. What does preparation look like? Not financial advice, but financial education. Historically, people who survived high inflation periods had certain things in common. They held real assets that couldn't be printed: property, productive land, businesses, commodities. They held skills that remained valuable regardless of currency value. They diversified across currencies and jurisdictions. They understood that cash was for transactions, not for storing wealth long term. The World Gold Council's 2024 data shows central banks themselves are preparing. They purchased over 1,000 tons of gold in 2023 alone, the highest level since 1967. China, Russia, India, and Turkey are leading the charge. When the people who print money are buying gold, that tells you something about their confidence in paper. But here's what gives me hope and what should empower you. Understanding the game changes everything. Once you see that inflation is a hidden tax, that it transfers wealth from savers to debtors, from the powerless to the powerful, you can make different choices. You can educate yourself. You can adapt. The Hungarian woman I mentioned at the start, her story didn't end in ruin. Those who recognized the pattern early and moved wealth into real assets survived and even thrived. Those who trusted that the government would fix it, that money would regain value, that things would return to normal, they lost everything. The difference wasn't luck, it was understanding the pattern. No one can predict exactly when or if current inflation will accelerate into crisis. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. What we're seeing now, the massive debt, the money printing, the real negative interest rates, the asset bubbles. These are the same verses that preceded every major currency crisis. The tempo might be different, but the song is familiar. Your purchasing power is being eroded every single day. That's not fear-mongering, that's mathematics. The question isn't whether inflation will affect you. It already is. The question is whether you understand it well enough to make informed decisions about your future. If this changed how you think about your money and why everything feels more expensive, you need to watch my video on the dollar's endgame, 3 scenarios for the world's reserve currency. It connects directly to what we've covered here and shows you what the next decade might look like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. We're just getting started uncovering the truth about global currencies and how they actually work. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.